Hello and welcome to today's episode of Platinum Talks Wealth. Emmy-nominated journalist Jennifer Rogers Markwell changed gears in her television career when she realized the need to help women make sense of investing. She regularly hosts educational workshops to empower women and others to take charge of their financial future. Now, join your host, Platinum Wealth Management President Jennifer Rogers Markwell, as she leads us into the world of money memories, money infidelities, and how these can mold our relationship with our personal finances as adults. Let's dive into today's episode.
Hi, and thanks for joining us on the Platinum Talks Wealth podcast. It's Jennifer Rogers Markwell, and today we're joined by Natalie Perry. Natalie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so tell us all about you and why you do what you do.
Yeah, so I'm an estate planning attorney and I have a background as a CPA as well. So I started out in accounting, but my dad, who was also an accountant, was always encouraging me to go to law school. So long story short, I went to law school and I do really like it a little better than accounting, although it's fantastic to have the accounting background and do what I do in the estate planning field, because it really helps me understand numbers and balance sheets. And I tend to work with a lot of business owners. So yes, I took the parental encouragement and have turned it into a 25 plus year law career, which has been great. I really like what I do. It's very personal. You really get to know families and sometimes the generations even, and, work with them sometimes on their most intimate issues with their family and their children and how to address things. So I do really enjoy what I do. I think it's a great area of practice, and I enjoy all the people that I work with.
Is that something that you wanted to do growing up, or how did you navigate to where you are now?
Yeah, I started out as a tax lawyer. So I did some corporate tax, which is obviously a little more dry, and I was learning a lot of, I was in, because I have the accounting background, I think my tax expertise really was a great segue into law, because and I think tax law is not as saturated as of an area. So there's not as many people who are able to do both the financial, the tax planning, and then the drafting of the estate plans is maybe the easiest part, but it's really kind of the overall structure that I think can be more challenging. So I started out in the corporate field, and I still do work with some business owners and do touch on some corporate tax issues, but I shifted over into estate planning kind of because I had the opportunity to do it. And then just really fell in love with the, relationships I made with clients and their families. And
did you want to do this as a kid? Did you grow up thinking you wanted to do this?
No, I think I wanted to be a journalist, but I don't know. My grandfather had a typewriter and we used to play on it when we were little. And I don't know, that was the only thing I could think of. I didn't know a lot of lawyers. I didn't have lawyers in my family. I'm the first one. But, as I got older and learned more about careers, I always thought it was interesting.
So your role, I feel like, is so needed on so many different aspects, right? Like as a financial advisor and planner, like I work closely with trust attorneys as well, because that's a whole nother side with relationships with families, making sure that they're protected. Can you share kind of on your day-to-day what you do? Maybe people have heard the term, they don't really know exactly what that is or what that encompasses. Can you share kind of an overview of what you do and how you support families?
Sure, for sure. So I tend to, at this point in my career, kind of being more experienced, do a lot of the advising, which is really the fun part. I get a client will reach out to me, say, hey, I'm thinking I need this, or often someone like you will have told them that they should have an estate plan. So they'll reach out and we'll have a conversation about the process of gathering the information and talking with their spouse and how best to kind of keep things moving forward. And sometimes they don't end up going through with it, unfortunately, but lots of times they do because they know they need it and they know it's important.
When it comes to that, though, I think there's a lot of folks that are like, do I need it? Am I a fit for it? How do I know if that's an avenue that I want to explore? What would you share to folks that are like, I don't know if I need that, or maybe I totally do and I just don't know?
Yeah, I think it does depend, and people do tend to misconceive kind of the idea that you have to be really wealthy or you need to have, so many $1 million or something to need an estate plan. But there are degrees of estate plans. There's a very simple will with powers of attorney that cover disability. And I think everyone should have that, because if you don't, lots of times people might end up fighting, or there'll be disharmony among your children or your extended family, whatever your beneficiaries end up being. And especially when someone does get sick or become incapacitated, those are even tougher situations, because now we might see money go missing, or checks being written, or things being removed from someone's home, or things like that. So having set forth your wishes as to who you want to be in charge of your estate, and an estate doesn't have to mean, $5 million. An estate can mean $500,000. I mean, and less. That's, you worked for that money, and you should be able to say, in my opinion, where it goes, who gets it, who's in charge of it. And I think those are very important decisions to make, while you're still capable of making them. And the more thought you give it, I think the better it will work on the back end.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying that, because I think there is some confusion sometimes on like, is that going to be a fit for me? Another thing that I always like to share too, I think it's when you're looking to, potentially have that business relationship, who are you compatible with, right? What's that communication style with? Who do you trust? Who can you really pick up the phone or Zoom or meet in person, sometimes cases as well too? Like, who do you resonate with? Would you mind kind of sharing more on that as well? I feel like I always share that, because I'm like, it doesn't matter where you're at. We can be licensed in many states across the board, which I know you are as well. But really it's about the relationship.
Right. And I think you have to find someone that you feel comfortable talking to, because these are very personal issues. A lot of times, no one wants to call me, and talk to me for a half an hour and then say, oh, one of my kids has a drug problem, or my husband has a gambling problem, or whatever. Those are things we might feel embarrassed about, even though they're not our fault. And you have to really be able to share that stuff with your attorney, because if I know some things about your family that might cause me to write your estate plan a little bit differently, or at least give you options of, should you give that person their money outright? Should it go in a trust? Who should be in charge of it? Maybe your husband isn't the right person to be your executor or your trustee. Maybe your children aren't the right people. Maybe you need a bank or an advisor, like an attorney or a financial advisor. So there's so much to talk about. The more we know, the more effectively we can really advise them. So I don't think there's an easy way to say, you should look for a lawyer who's this many years out, or this law school, or this state, but you really need to find someone that you feel like you can trust, because that's so critical in what we do.
Yeah, no, I think that's very eloquently put, because I wholeheartedly agree there. I think having the trifecta to be able to support you and your family, right? That trust attorney, that trusted trust attorney, the trusted financial advisor or planner, and then that CPA. I think really having that trifecta to support you as you're moving forward, and what your financial goals, whatever those are, that they are, basically going to, like you said, reach the goals that you want, have the right people in the right places, from your family members, depending on what your dynamic looks like.
Right.
Yeah. So another thing we like to talk about here on the podcast are money memories. And I found it so interesting, because with clients throughout the years, there's always been that one common thread that everybody has, and it's a money memory that tied back to childhood or younger years that helped mold their relationship to money as an adult. And I mean, we're talking everybody, no matter what walk of life you are, there's some, seed that was planted when you were younger that, whether you're realizing that or not in this moment, has that psychology behind things of that money memory that helped, again, maybe change the narrative. Maybe that was important for you to change gears on that. But what was the original memory that you had that was your money memory that you're open to sharing?
Yeah, I hope it doesn't sound too trite, but I think the money doesn't grow on trees, is something I've had to unlearn. Kind of, not that it grows on trees, of course, but kind of the scarcity mentality. And
Mhm.
I'm sure as parents, my parents threw that around. Lots of people hear that, or say that to their kids, because we want them to be mindful of their spending or their habits or whatever. But I think when I was young and then first starting out myself, I was always so afraid to spend money or indulge in something, or even go on vacation, just like, oh, that seems so unnecessary. I better save my money because it doesn't grow on trees, and I don't know when the next money is coming, kind of stuff. But now now that I'm older, of course, it's easier, and I'm about to finish paying for college. So that's going to be very exciting to reassess my budget, and see what we can do, some fun things, do some fun things for ourselves with the money that we have. So that's exciting, but it is hard as you start out, things are so tight at first, and or not for everybody, but when you're starting out and everything seems overwhelmingly expensive, I think it's great to remember that we do have more control and our worth isn't tied up in our money, and a scarcity mindset can kind of work against you.
Yeah, that's so funny that you say that, because that terminology I feel like was definitely thrown around by that, older generations. I heard
Right.
that a lot from my grandparents too. Money doesn't grow on trees. And when you think about it, you're like, well, no, it doesn't. But you also want to be thoughtful and find a balance somewhere along the way.
And you do have to not treat yourself per se, like, extravagantly, but you do have to engage in self-care, right? Or, rest and all those things. And you can't just be like money, money, money. It's
Yeah,
not a good
no.
way to live.
And the younger generation, I think, is getting a really good handle on it. So some of the members of my team are much younger, some of the interns that we have on board. So their mentality is definitely interesting compared to mine, right? I was brought the, thought process of you keep your head down, you work really, really hard. And then maybe you have some time to play somewhere along the way, but you work really hard and keep your head down. And their mentality is, no, we want to do a little bit of everything, but we also want to take care of ourselves so we don't burn out. We don't want to go necessarily too extravagant either. There's a lot of savers out there, but they're balanced in their thinking, which is so refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. They're not tying themselves to these like life goals that we kind of did, I think. Like you must buy a house and you must have two kids, whatever, right?
Yeah, each
They're a little
generation
bit
is
more. Mhm.
yeah, each generation is so different, and I feel like, we're learning from all the generations across the board because the mindset's so different.
Right.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that.
You are listening to the Platinum Talks Wealth podcast.
Hey, it's Jennifer. I wanted to take a quick break to remind you that you are worthy to have a seat at the table when it comes to money and your finances. Both me and my team at Platinum Wealth Management, want to meet you where you are, whether you're starting out, starting over, or have been investing for years. Reach out to us at platinumwealth.net or call us at 775-717-0001. We'd be honored to help.
And now, back to the podcast.
That you think, listeners could learn from.
Yeah, well, on the personal side, I still balance my checkbook. So, and I print the statement, I check off what's downloaded into my financial software. And I tell you, people think I'm crazy, that it's such a waste of time, but I just caught a check that my bank posted to my account that was supposed to be for someone else's account. And it was a
Ooh.
couple $100s, but I think the account number was one digit off or something small, and the computer just must have mismatched it. But then because I am doing that, if I go to my husband and then say, oh, what's this? Oh, what's this? It used to be, especially going back to being younger, a little confrontational, I think, that it was like he felt like he had to defend himself. And I'm like, I'm not judging you. I'm just trying to make sure this isn't fraud or whatever, right? So I think we've definitely evolved out of that, sort of confrontational mentality of that we both feel okay spending what we're spending or whatever. But that did take some time to kind of get there, because when I'm the money manager, let's say, it seems like I think he feels like he has to justify what he's spending, and I can understand if he was saying to me, what did you buy? Of course, you're going to be defensive at first, So learning to work together kind of has been a good, or, learning to both like appreciate each other's, habits or expenses or whatever has been good for us, I think.
Yeah, I think communication is just such a huge element, right? In all aspects of finance. Like we tease in our household, we're like, it's Friday night, we're talking money, we're talking budgets. Like we're not always like that, but we tease about it because we're like, ooh, it's a fantastic Friday night in finance in our house. So everyone does things a little bit differently. And I know from obviously with your experience, I'm sure you've seen things from, the client side of things with financial infidelities. Anything that you're open that you can even share from that side of things that others could learn from as well?
Yeah, I think my biggest sort of pet peeve is maybe the wrong word, but kind of something that I try to always work through or work to correct is getting both both of a couple involved in the planning process, because lots of times it will be either the more financially savvy spouse or the to-do list spouse, something like that, who's making it happen and getting it done, and we're having the conversations. But if we don't include both husband and wife or whatever, the two partners, it can be challenging, I feel like, for that other person who wasn't in on all those conversations, but maybe does have things to say or concerns, that they'd like to express. So I always try to include both whenever I can. And sometimes I think the other person maybe is doing it out of necessity. Of course, sometimes that's the way with the kids, or just the lack of availability. But that's my one area where I always try to make an extra effort to keep both parties in the loop.
Yeah, that very good point, because I think that for me, I mean, my story, how I got here is exactly that, right? My grandpa was the finance guy, and not that they had a lot, but what they had was spread around everywhere. And, it came to a point where he passed away and we were like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And then we found ourselves, going in front of different advisors and banks and whatnot. And again, like I said, they didn't have much, but it was spread around everywhere. And we sat with folks, and my grandma's like, I don't have a warm, fuzzy feeling. And imagine how many other women are going through this as well. And I said, yeah, I'll learn everything I can. So I think going back to the point of like having everybody present for those conversations, whether you're the finance person in your household or you're not, be present for it, because you don't want to, try to pick up the pieces after the fact, Lord forbid, after, your loved one is no longer here. So I think that's always such a valid conversation. And even people that are, you feel like sometimes they attend those meetings, right, to check a box. They're like, I'm here, I'm listening, I'm here, but they're maybe not as excited about it. But I still commend them for being present and showing up and having the conversations, because you want to know, obviously the trust attorney you're working with, the financial advisor you're working with, you want to know and have those relationships, because if you need to lean in when something happens, it's already established.
Right. Yeah. And I think it is such a personal discussion that it's really helpful to get everybody to the table, just to your point, that they don't want to feel left out of the process or like they didn't get their voice heard.
Yeah, and everybody's thought is different, right? People's risk tolerance are different. People's thoughts of money are different. People's money memories are different. So they come from
Yeah.
different places when they, take a seat at the table to have that financial conversation on your side, on my side. I mean, it's quite fascinating to me, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And they see their kids differently a lot of times. The one might see strengths that the other one doesn't, appreciate as much or something.
Yeah, yeah. It's really leaning into the relationship and being present.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that as well.
Yeah.
And as we start to wrap the conversation, one thing I like to ask is, what are tips and or tricks that you use to utilize money differently in your household? And we've heard all different kinds of things, from auditing yourself to keeping a money journal. What's something that you do that you may be different that others could learn from as well?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm pretty diligent about trying to manage my expenses, and I do track them and really just try to be um, keeping up with the data, because I think it's all about having the data and knowing what there is. But I do find planning a challenge, and I don't know if you have any tips on that, because sometimes it's just hard to plan for those expenses that come either out of the blue or, and then I feel discouraged about the budgeting when it doesn't go the way I had set it all out. So it does, you have to, I guess, just be patient with it and know that things are going to come up, but it can be stressful, I feel like.
Yeah, I think the way I look at financial planning too is it's a roadmap, right? That roadmap is going to move and change with you, and as perfectly as we plan. I mean, I think this is where communication comes back into, right? As perfectly as we plan things out, did something hit the fan in your world? Maybe, right? But that's also why we have that emergency money on the sidelines as the first line of defense to go to. Strategically planning, a lot of folks will lean into, oh, I've got a trip coming up, or oh, I need to buy a car coming up. And I know those, those are going to be happening on my roadmap. So they'll set up separate accounts earmarked for that goal specifically. But
Okay.
again, it's a roadmap. It moves and evolves with you. And I'm sure, like from your side of things, you see people passing or inheritances coming in, or unwinding estates. I mean, those are changes that continuously change your financial planning roadmap as well.
Right. Right. I think people don't realize when they inherit money how even a small amount of money, what we might call small, can really be, life changing for some people.
Yeah, and it's impactful differently for different people. That's why
Mhm.
it's hard to say too, where you hear of the concept, oh, you have to have this much to retire comfortably. You have to have this. Well, each person's so different, right? Like there's some clients that, yes, they have multi-million-dollar accounts, but they spend $1,500 a month. They'll never run out of money, right? And then there's the
Yeah.
flip side of
Yeah.
the clients that have very, very exceedingly large accounts and they spend exceedingly large amounts every single month. So everybody's different. And then the folks that are, starting out or starting over that are like, I'm earmarking this much for savings, this much for investing, this much for living, and they're in a different conversation as well. So everybody is so unique and different. I mean, I commend you for having, a budget, kind of going in, looking at things and seeing it, because a lot of folks sometimes will just stick their head in the sand and like, whatever happens, happens. So at least, I mean, by doing diligent homework and really keeping up with yourself, I think that's the most important step.
Yeah. Information is power, right? That's, I'm sure,
Yes.
what we tell both our types of clients, they have to have the information.
Yeah.
And then
And
you're more empowered.
communication
Yes.
with that information, I think, makes it even that much more powerful, and how, you can serve, how I can serve, how we can, be the best stewards for clients along the way.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much for making time. I so appreciate it.
This was great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And hopefully those of you watching or listening will join us in the next Platinum Talks Wealth podcast.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, Platinum Talks Wealth, please subscribe and share. For more information about Jennifer Rogers Markwell or Platinum Wealth Management, please visit www.platinumwealth.net. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member of FINRA and SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and their companies are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Platinum Wealth Management.